Dr. Roy Shelby, I'm very pleased you asked me about this interview because I'm not only a brain surgeon, it so happens that I was born at the beginning of the century and I could assist not only to the birth but to the development of neurosurgery in France. And I'll tell you why. Clovis Vincent, who, as you know, is the man who founded brain surgery in France, was a comrade at school with my father. And so I knew Vincent even when I was 5 or 6 years old. And later on, in 1926, it so happened that one could think I could become a geographer because I had won a sort of prize among the students in France. I had won the first prize in geography, and possibly geography could have been a career. So we had, I remember very well, in May 26, 1926, we had a lunch in Paris with Clovis Vincent, my father, and a very well-known geographer. And everybody agreed that geography was not a real career to adopt. And to my great surprise, Vincent, who was still a neurologist, very well-known neurologist, but only a neurologist, told us he must be the first brain surgeon in France because we don't have yet any real brain surgery. Okay, well, that's how I started my medical studies, and that's how I became later on a neurosurgeon. During my medical studies, Vincent, as you know, was really the first brain surgeon because he went to America where he visited Cushing and he decided to do surgery himself. At that time, he was, as you probably know, very friendly with a well-known surgeon in France called Thierry de Martel.
They practiced together, I believe, at the time, did they not?
Excuse me?
Professor Vincent, Dr. Vincent, practiced neurology for or with de Martel.
No, de Martel was a general surgeon.
Yes.
And Vincent was a neurologist, and especially the very best pupil of Joseph Babinski,
yes,
the famous French neurologist. And Vincent and Martel was very good friends. They spent their internat, as we say in French, their residency together. Both of them was very fond of sports.
Where did they spend their internship?
Oh, in different hospitals in Paris. Mm-hmm. Not in the same, but not far from each other. Vincent was fond of cycling and boxing, and Martel was very fond of boxing. That's how they were really very, very close together. And when Vincent told me that I should become a brain surgeon, he told me, you will learn neurology with me, and you will learn surgery with Martel. That was the situation of things during the 20s.
What, this was 1926 now?
From 26 to 32, let's say.
This is when he said that to you?
Yeah, and so I was supposed to learn brain surgery with Martel. But as you probably know, Vincent became a brain surgeon himself, and he succeeded so beautifully that finally, between Martel and himself, a sort of rift developed, you see? Yes. And their friendship dissolved. So after all, I didn't work with Martel, I only worked with Vincent.
Where did de Martel have his practice? Which hospital did he work in primarily?
Where?
Which hospital did Dr. de Martel?
Martel didn't belong to an official hospital.
He had his own nursing home.
He worked in private nursing homes.
Yes.
And Vincent was a neurologist at La Pitié.
Yes.
Well, I was myself nominated. I was an intern in 1922 or 3, and my internship was not only with Vincent, but in the main neurological service in Paris, mostly in La Salpêtrière. And it's in La Salpêtrière that in 1927 I made my thesis on brain edema. It would have been better to call it temporal herniation, because after all, that was the main topic of it. But in the same time, I discovered something. I discovered the herniation of the cerebellum above the tentorium. And if I tell you about that, I show that to Vincent on on an autopsy specimen, and he told me that's very interesting. And he showed me later that this herniation of the cerebellum above the natorium could lead to diagnosis errors because it could look on the ventriculogram as a tumor of the third ventricle. And it was not. It was just a cerebellar tumor which has herniated the cerebellum above the natorium. Just to show you that Vincent has a very good clinical sense in many things.
Was Babinski still living at the time?
Who?
Dr. Babinski, was he still alive?
I'll tell you about Babinski because I knew him, as a matter of fact. Babinski had to retire when he was 64 years old. That was the regulation. And in spite of that, he had a consulting day every week in La Pitié, not in Vincent's service, but in the service of a friend of his called Vaquez. And I used to go and watch Babinski one day a week to see how he consulted patients. It was very interesting indeed. No, Babinski was still very much alive, and he was quite pleased of the progress that Vincent made, progress more and more in brain surgery. When Vincent had this rift with Martel, he couldn't go on operating in the same place as Martel did, which was the private nursing home of Martel. So Vincent did something extraordinary. He took his patients from La Pitié, and he took them to another nursing home where he paid everything for them out of his pocket. He went with more and more successes, and one famous day in the story of French brain surgery, he went to la Société Médicale des Hôpitaux de Paris, taking with me 8 or 10 patients, very much alive, and with their tumor in their pocket, as he said. So that was a tremendous success, and certainly very instrumental in the fact that Vincent had the chair of neurosurgery further on. But the main thing which led Vincent to the first chair of neurosurgery in France was the opinion of Cushing. Harvey Cushing went to Paris in 1935, and he was deeply impressed by the way Vincent operated. I remember he wrote that to Jefferson, whom I knew later on in Manchester. He wrote a letter to Jefferson where he said he was deeply impressed by the authority and the calm with which Vincent operated on. Oh, I better read you now that letter from Klebs to Cushing, which is about the same visit. Dear Harvey, there came over me again that thrill of a superior beatitude when you and I, that morning at La Pitié, saw for the first time Vincent at work. Of course, said Klebs, I had no judgment in the matter, but I could not help but feel your silent enthusiasm, your deep satisfaction with what you had not anticipated. That's the way I thought. A Perugino must have felt when he peeped over Raphael's shoulder onto the canvas he slowly developed with his brush. Well, that's something, you know. So, of course, that enthusiasm that Cushing had for Vincent was instrumental when Vincent obtained the chair of neurosurgery in Paris, because thanks to Cushing's advice, the Rockefeller Foundation gave the money for it.
Dr. Alan Gregg, who had his office in Paris at the time.
Yeah, well, I met him too. Yeah.
Yes, and someone at the Ministry of Education in the French government also
well, Roussy.
Yes.
Roussy was a rector of the Paris Academy, was very helpful too for that.
He helped to obtain the money from the French government and the Rockefeller Foundation to establish the first professorship.
So Vincent had the chair of neurosurgery in January 1939, and I had the honor of being his first chef de clinique, which is a sort of thing you can give when you are professor of clinic. You can have chef de clinique. I was his first chef de clinique.
How many years had you worked with him by that time, by 1939?
Well, I worked with Vincent already 2 years during my internship, and then until his death.
No, I mean up until 1939. How many years until you became chef de clinique?
Well, I had 2 years of residency in his service, and then I was the chef de clinique.
I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Who were some of the other younger doctors at the time who also served on the neurosurgical service?
Vincent at that time, there was, de Martel went on with brain surgery, but in the meantime, he was doing general surgery as well, you see.
Yes.
Vincent had with him two assistants, Tuesch and David, first-class people. They were neurologists too, but they learned the brain surgery with Vincent. But after a while, things didn't go so well between Vincent, David, and Tuesch. You see, they were older, they wanted to fly on their own wings, as we say in France, and they left La Pitié. And they worked in Hôpital Sainte-Anne mostly. But there were not yet official services of neurosurgery in Paris except La Pitié. That was the only official one. It will be, as we will see, a little different just after the war. But at that time, in 1939, there was only one official neurosurgical service in France, as a matter of fact. That was Hôpital de La Pitié. So you can understand the amount of work we had. Yes. Not only with the emergency, but all the brain tumors of France went to us. I remember very well, if I may come back for a few years, when I started my internship, it was in July 33 or 34, it doesn't matter. Fortunately, it was in July, because I started work at 6 or 7 in the morning, and I never went home before 12 or 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. Fortunately, I lived in the hospital. And if it had not been July, I would never have seen the sun, you see. It was all day in the operating room and in the wards. Well, that's just an incident to show you the amount of work we had, because we were the only official place in France, really. Well, in 1939, as you know, that was the beginning of the war, too. So, in September 1939, I was sent to the First Army, the one on the Belgian front. Vincent had organized a series of neurosurgical units, one for each army. Well, I was in the First Army, which was rather unfortunate because I was a prisoner of war in the spring 40, at the beginning of the German offensive, and I was taken not far from Dunkirk. And I spent only 6 months in Germany. I said only because the Germans had taken as prisoners of war so many doctors that they had to send back a lot, you see, because the Vichy government wanted to have doctors at home. So I was sent back to Paris in December 1940. And then I organized at once with Vincent my departure to England, which took a few months. Usually people at that time went to England passing through Spain, and it took a few months of difficulty. Well, but I could act differently because I had some friends in the Vichy government, you know, who really were for the British and the American. And I could obtain a passport and a place on a ship who left from Marseille to the West Indies in the spring 41. So I left in the spring 41. I landed in La Martinique first, and then on another ship, I went to New York, where I spent 2 months in New York. And at that time, I made some very important contacts for the future of my brain surgical career. I met a man you certainly know of, Foster Kennedy. He was an extremely nice and helpful man. And really, I had 2 or 3 weeks marvelous with him, and he introduced me to Larry Poole. Larry Poole, who became probably my best friend among the American neurosurgeons. So these 2 months in New York were certainly not lost. I had another very useful encounter too. I met a man, possibly you know him by name, a man called Jean Monnet. He's the man who called the father of Europe. Jean Monnet was French. He was a French lawyer, but he was the man officially in charge of what the British wanted to buy from the Americans for the war, see, because America was not yet at war.
Was he representing the Vichy government in
No, not at all.
America?
No, he was in America, and he worked for the English, you see.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was in charge of buying what the British needed for the war, especially the planes. And that's how I flew to England in a bomber plane, thanks to Jean Monnet. I had a seat on a bomber plane flying from Canada to Glasgow.
But he was an employee of the British government at the time?
Yes, but he was a French-British lawyer, but employed by the English
He
government.
was not with General de Gaulle yet.
Oh, not at all. De Gaulle was not, practically not known at that time.
Yes.
Well, he was known, but very, very little out of. But he was working, Jean Monnet, I'm quite sure. He
Did
was
you
working for the British.
Did you meet Saint-Jean Perse in
Of course.
Washington?
Alexis Léger.
Now, he was a Vichy. He supported Vichy.
No, not at all.
Did he not?
He had left the Vichy government, and he was in Washington working in the American Library. But he had nothing to do with it. He had separated himself from the Vichy government at once.
There's a misunderstanding about that in America, because I've seen it written that Saint-Jean Perse supported the Vichy government.
No, I can assure you, he was in exile from the Vichy government, and how very much so.
I'm very glad to hear
I
that.
can give you my word for that. Yeah,
I'm very glad.
he was
to
a very
hear that.
interesting man, by the way. You know, Saint-Jean Perse, he had the Nobel Prize for literature, and so on, but he was quite a man. Well, we are speaking of men who have nothing to do with brain surgery, but while I was in New York at that time, the 2 months I spent in New York, I became extremely friendly with a marvelous man, Saint-Exupéry, the French writer.
Oh, you met him?
Oh, yeah,
too?
we became deep friends.
What was he doing in New York?
Well, he was in between. He was not with de Gaulle, he was not with Vichy, you see? He thought there was something good with the fight Pétain. Well, anyway, he joined de Gaulle later on, but at that time he was in between. But he was such an interesting and sincere man, first-class chap. I think the two men I met who impressed me the most were Saint-Exupéry and Clovis Vincent. Well, anyway, I flew to England in August 41, London and Glasgow, and at once I worked in the emergency medical hospital of the British in brain surgery. I did very little work. And I made some physiological research in the National Institute for Medical Research up in Hampstead. That was very interesting too. But I kept in touch with Vincent all that time, because Frenchmen went to and fro to France, you know, and so we could keep into contact. Not every day, but at least once a year. So he knew and we knew what was going on. As a matter of fact, l'hôpital de La Pitié at that time had been taken over by the Germans. 4 hospitals in Paris had been taken over, including La Pitié. But Vincent was so highly soaked up, even by the Germans, that they did not expel him. They just left him a corner of La Pitié where he still had his independent neurosurgical wards.
That in part was because of Professor Turnus, who was
Yes.
in charge of the
Tönnies certainly played a
German,
role in that. Yeah, I knew
medical
Tönnies too.
service.
Yeah. So they left him alone, and they respected him too for another reason. They respect Vincent as a guerrier, a warrior, you see? Because as you probably know, de Martel too, during the 1914-1918 war, they had been very extraordinary men. Vincent, I don't know if you know that, but Vincent at the Battle of Verdun, he was a doctor of a regiment. All the officers had been killed, and the men didn't know what to do. He said, what are we going to do? Nobody is to lead us. Vincent said, I'm going to lead you. He had no weapons, nothing at all. But he led them to the German trenches. And he had the Legion of Honor on the battlefield. That was sort of maneuver. He was afraid of nothing.
De Martel also fought at Verdun?
Hmm?
De Martel
No, he was not
also
in the
fought-
same place, but de Marcel had also a very courageous behavior during the war. That nothing is on the same plane nearly. I was going to use that Vincent. The German respected Vincent, thanks to his certainly thanks to his military behavior during the war. I realized that because in 1936, I'm sorry, I come back. In 1936, I went with Vincent to Germany. And I realized how the German respected Vincent, not only because of his neurological status, but because of the man he was, certainly. Well, anyway, let's now come back to...
Is that where did you meet Professor Turnus?
Oh,
at
yeah,
that
I met him
time?
several times because he went to La Pitié before the war.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I didn't meet him after the war,
But,
and
no,
not
I
even during the war.
understand.
No.
But it was because that visit to Paris that you believe Professor Turnus, with his respect for Professor Vincent,
Yeah.
decided not to have the German medical services occupy the neurosurgical services at La Pitié.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure Tony's influence was predominant.
Were
surely.
you in the service of Professor Vincent at the time of Maurice Ravel's admission? The
Who?
composer Maurice Ravel. Were you at La Pitié when Ravel was admitted?
I don't get the name.
Ravel.
How do you spell it?
Maurice Ravel.
Oh, Ravel, surely. I'm sorry.
Were you there at the time?
No, I was during the war. I didn't realize you were speaking of Ravel. Yeah. As a matter of fact, as you know, Vincent operated on Ravel.
Yes.
But it
A
was a sort of.
ventriculogram.
I was there too. But it was a sort of pre-senile atrophy of the brain. There was
Yes.
really nothing to be done. Yeah.
Circumtemporal.
Yeah.
Oui.
Just a moment.
Mhm.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry because I didn't realize you were changing the subject.
I was going back a little bit. During the 1930s, Alain Joannin was on neurology, I think.
Alain Joannin was professor of neurology at
Yes.
La Salpêtrière.
Yes.
Yeah. No, not exactly. Guillain was professor of
Guillain.
because I was the intern of Guillain. But after that, Alain Joannin succeeded Guillain.
Mhm.
During
And-
the war, Alain Joannin was professor of neurology at La Salpêtrière.
Had you known also Foix,
How do you spell
Dr.
it?
Foix, F-O-I-X?
Oh, no, I didn't know him because I know he died
had already
very early.
died. I know
No,
he
I
died
never knew
very
him. He
young.
died very early, a long time before the war he died. Yes.
You had not known him.
No.
He was very young when he
Yeah, Vincent held him in high esteem, but
Yes.
he died very, very early. I think of a rupture of a stomach ulcer.
Yes. So during the war
But
years,
anyway, let's suppose I am now in England during the war. And
Yes.
I told you I kept in touch with Vincent. Yeah. And during the war, I met all the British neurosurgeons I knew, especially Hugh Kearns, and I kept in very close contact with the Oxford School, as you will see later. And I knew a man very well too, possibly not as, of course, not as well known as Kearns, but Dixon Wright. Do you know him by name?
just by name.
Yeah. He was a very clever man, very active, and we had something in common, not only brain surgery, but he liked rugby football very much, and so did I. And he worked in St. Mary's Hospital, and it so happened that the team of St. Mary's Hospital was the best in England at that time, during the war. So, and in St. Mary's Hospital, in case you don't know, that's where I met, because he worked there, Fleming, the man who discovered penicillin. He was in St. Mary's Hospital. He was a very, very nice man, very clever and very nice. Well, anyway, I didn't do much brain surgery during the war in England. You see, I just had contacts and made some brain physiology, as I told you before, worked on brain edema up in Hampstead.
You visited Manchester, I imagine. Is that when
Oh,
you
yes,
met
I spent several weeks with Jefferson.
Jefferson?
He was an extremely nice man, and I was very fond of him.
Did you come to know his son, who became a neurosurgeon also?
No, I didn't meet him.
His son lives in Wales now, but I've never met his son even.
No, I didn't know his man.
But Jefferson, did you meet Norman Dott in Edinburgh?
No, I knew Dodd well, but I didn't go up to Scotland to see him. No, no. It just so happened I didn't see didn't see Dodd at that time, but I knew him well.
How long?
And first-class surgeon, Dodd.
Yes, excellent. He had trained with Cushing also, and had some amusing stories to relate about his training with Cushing in Boston. And most of the time, how long were you in England then before you returned to France?
I was 3 years in England.
3 years.
From August 41 to August 44.
And mostly at Oxford? Or
No, mostly in London.
In London, St.
Mostly in
Mary's.
Emergency Medical Hospital in Hayward Heath, not far from
Yes.
London, and to London at Queen Square and in the National Institute for Medical Research. I was most of the time in London. And at the end of the war, I organized a neurosurgical unit with de Gaulle, and I landed in Paris a few days after the liberation of Paris.
Had you come to know Gordon Holmes at
No,
the
no, I knew them
National
by
Institute?
name, of course, but no, I
Yes.
never met them. No.
Or Sir Charles Simons? at,
Simon Tammy, yes.
You knew
Yeah.
Simons. And Critchley?
Critchley, MacDonald Critchley, yes, I met them, but incidentally. I knew
see.
mostly the neurosurgeons, as
Yes.
you can well realize, yes.
When did you return to France? What month did you return to France?
Exactly the 1st of September.
1st of September of
I
44.
was in Paris the 1st of September,
Of 1944?
on 1844. 6 or 7 days after the liberation of
Yes.
Paris.
And I believe you told me that during the German occupation of Paris, that Professor Vincent had saved some lives of members of the
Oh, yes.
underground.
Yes, very much.
I wonder if you'd tell us about
Well,
that.
I wasn't there.
No, I
Unfortunately, I
understand.
wasn't there, but I knew he hid some resistance, as we say in France. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
surely, surely.
How did he do that?
I remember. Well, there was I don't remember the name, but 2 or 3 people. He faked a scalp injury for them. See, they had dressings on the head and stuff. That I know, but of course that's a hearsay for me because I was in London.
I was told
You
this
understand
also.
that?
He also changed their names. He covered their head with dressings so they couldn't be seen. And the Germans were not there,
Yeah.
and they left him alone, and so a good many were
I know
saved.
it's true, but I wasn't there. But I know,
Yes.
I'm quite sure it's certainly exactly what the man would do. You know.
Well, when you returned early September of 1944, did you return to La Pitié?
At once, yes. I think I was not 5 minutes in Paris. I was already at La Pitié. Yeah? Of course, I was there.
To go back,
And
just-
immediately I resumed my duties, meaning I was in first in command after Vincent.
you again assumed the duties of chef de clinique.
I was still chef de. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what was the status at the time. But I know that I was the first assistant of Vincent at that time. And by the way, at that time, La Pitié was American occupied, because when the American occupied Paris, they took over the places, the 4 hospitals that the German had taken, which was very sensible.
Well, I believe that Glenn Sperling, Colonel Sperling.
I was just going to tell you about Glenn Sperling.
Okay.
Glenn Sperling I met in England and then in Paris. We were probably my best friend with Larry Poole. He was such a nice man and useful, and thanks to him, I could have lots of penicillin, which was very important for the work I went on with on the brain abscesses in Paris. Well, perhaps I'm going to tell you a few things about the thing I did at that time.
Yes, please.
Yes, I didn't tell you much about what I did before the war, but anyway, that is not important. But after the war, with Vincent, under Vincent's leadership, I did first of all a rather important work on brain abscesses and what I call meningeal abscesses, acute subdural abscesses. And thanks to penicillin, I advocated the radical cure of brain abscesses, not only in classical abscesses, but even in abscesses metastatic from the lung. And it's a thing I'm rather proud of, because Cairns himself recognized he was the first to achieve the cure of thoracogenic abscesses of the brain by advocating the radical method of excision and of course with penicillin, which helped a lot, as you can imagine. That was one of my main works. And the second work, which I believe is not bad, it was on acute subdural emphysema. You know that, probably you don't know, but before the war, the mortality was 100% of subdural emphysema.
I had several patients with
and I advocated at the time, as early as 46 or even 45, to turn I'm sorry, I'm very technical about it, but after all, we are between surgeons. I turned a bilateral frontal flap so I could have access to all the pockets of pus, wash that with penicillin and so on, and believe me, put back the flap in place. And everything went well. I had at least 75 or 80% of cures, and only 1 or 2 cases where the flap had to be removed because of bone separation.
With
At the same time, they did the sort of thing in Oxford, but with multiple burr holes, which is probably simpler, but possibly not. Or anyway, that was the way it was at that time.
With abscess due to chronic ear infection, did you drain the abscess first and let it to collapse?
I was always against I was always not for drainage, but excision first, even for acute abscesses.
Even on the left side, the dominant
side? Of course not. I wrote that, of course, not in the Rolandic left side. No, yes. Of course not. There you have to satisfy yourself with evacuation, with tapping. Yes, surely. But don't forget, at that time, we didn't have many means of fighting brain edema. We didn't have all the corticosteroid and things we have now. But we had the antibiotics, which was, of course, terribly important.
Did,
And I repeat again, thanks to Sperling, which I'll never thank again.
Did Colonel Sperling also help to obtain more neurosurgical equipment for Lapitié because of his
Possibly
visit?
not. That I didn't realize much. No, I bought my. Oh, by the way, I bought myself some equipment from England when I, thanks to a man you know, Leslie Oliver.
Oh, sure.
Thanks to Oliver, I think he worked in the West London. Well, he gave me lots of equipment which I could bring to France, to Lapitié. Yeah.
Now, was Colonel Sperling physically in charge of neurosurgery for the first few
For
weeks?
Europe.
For all of Europe, yes.
All of Europe. Yeah.
Yes.
You were in command of all the American neurosurgical units for Europe. You see? So
And that included Lapitié at that time until the end of the war?
they stayed in Lapitié until the end of the war, yes.
I mean, the American doctors.
Yes, the American.
Yes.
Lapitié was an American hospital until the end of the war, except for the place where was Vincent. Vincent was still independent, of course.
Not neurosurgery.
Yeah.
Okay. Did any American neurosurgeons work with Clovis Vincent at that time?
No, we saw lots of them, of course, but they didn't work with us. But they had the places where they had to work, you see.
Yes. I had forgotten to ask earlier about Thierry de Martel. He had committed suicide.
Yeah, I was going to tell you about that. That was on the 15th of June, 1940. At that time, I was already a prisoner of war, but I knew later on, and yes, he committed suicide by, strangely enough for a doctor, by swallowing strychnine. And Vincent, who, as I told you, he was not his friend anymore, but he held him in high esteem, of course. And he didn't understand why de Martel, who was, as you know, a confirmed patriot, why did he commit suicide instead of go on with the fight? You see what I mean? So Vincent told me he thought there was something else, something personal, but that I don't know. One never can tell. Huh?
I read several years ago that de Martel was suffering from carcinoma.
That I never.
And was depressed, but I do not know if that's
I
true.
believe it's not true because Vincent would have told me, you know.
Yes.
And he never discussed that with me. So I don't think it was true.
But de Martel.
Anyway, it was not a reason to commit. Maybe that could have helped, yes, but it's not a reason to commit suicide just the day when the German entered into Paris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He was much older than Clovis Vincent.
No, they're exactly the same age.
Exactly the
Same age. They had been interned at the same time. They were exactly the same. Oh yes, sure, the same. Maybe 1 year difference, but that's all.
You mentioned earlier the younger interests and hobbies, boxing and all of Clovis Vincent and de Martel. What other hobbies or activities did Clovis Vincent have other than neurology and neurosurgery?
De Martel, I don't know, but Vincent, his main activity, his main hobby was hunting. And every weekend, he went hunting in the center of France. And I stayed there. I was every weekend in Lapitié, but I did dislike that, on the contrary. And as a matter of fact, since we discussed Vincent's hobbies, in 1936, I told you he took me with him to Germany. And first of all, we saw in Berlin Sauerbruch. Does the name convey something to you? Sauerbruch, who was a very well-known general surgeon. His main field was thoracic surgery. But he fancied himself as being a brain surgeon as well.
Yes.
And we assisted to one of his operations, which was extremely distressing, to say the least. He opened the skull, felt, without opening the dura, felt through the dura, unoperable glioma, and he threw the bone flap away, and he closed it. That was in the middle of 5 or 6 operations, you know? It was really, that was brain, as some people thought what brain surgery was like before the war. But after that, we went to Stockholm, and we to see Oliver Krona. And I tell you that because Oliver Krona, just as Vincent was great for hunting. They were, Vincent and Oliver Krona was friends because of that. They had a common love for hunting big game, even so. And when we saw Olive Cronaz, that was a different story. He was a real brain surgeon, as you know, with a first-class team. Lissolm, the radiologist, Sjöquist, and so on. Well, lots of people. So that was very, very fruitful, that trip to Stockholm. Fruitful for another reason. That's where I met Rylander, the cyclist. You will see, and this brings us back to 1946 or 47, if you like, so I can tell you about what I did after the war.
You made a member of the French Army, an officer of the French Army
Not at once.
in London?
Not at once. The last year. Not the 2 first years, I was working, as I told you before, with the Emergency Medical Service,
Yes.
British. Huh?
Yes.
And I was in contact, of course, with the French forces, but I was not yet a captain in the French army, which I became again, I don't know, in 1943 or something like that. Yeah.
I see. You mentioned that when you returned to England by way of New York, that you worked in the British hospitals in the emergency medical services for approximately 2 years.
Yes.
And then you met General de Gaulle.
No, I met him at once.
Oh, you met him
I
at
met
once.
him at the beginning. I met him the first week. The first week of my arrival in England. Oh, I met him at once. Yes, the thing was organized at once. I met him, yeah.
At his office?
At his office, yeah.
Yes.
Just,
It was a very small office
well,
at first.
at that time, he practically spoke to every Frenchman landing in England, you know.
Yes.
So why not me?
In 1943, you officially became a captain in the
Yes, I organized
military.
a neurosurgical unit.
Mhm.
I told you before, with the help of the British hospitals,
Yes.
especially Leslie Oliver, which I took with me to Normandy and Paris. After landing, of course. I was not at the front line, no.
Yes, but you landed in Normandy.
And in Normandy, a place called Utah Beach, or
You-
Omaha Beach it was, yes.
You
But
landed
not the first day.
No, but you landed at Omaha Beach.
Yeah,
not
I love
one of the-
Omaha Beach, yes.
I see. By that time, then Bayeux was the main city for Omaha
You were there
Beach.
at that time?
No, I'm
No,
not that old.
no.
No, I wish I had been, but I
Yeah.
was too young. But then you came just after General Leclerc and the American troops with General Leclerc liberated Paris. And that was on the 23rd. The official celebration was the 23rd of August.
Yeah.
And then you arrived about
Oh,
September
the 1st of September.
And then you immediately went to La Pitié.
Of course, yes. I didn't even spend one night in Paris. My first, I went and saw Vincent at once, of course, yes. Yes.
Were you married at this time?
No, I don't think so.
And then you resumed your work on brain abscess.
Yeah,
using the
let
penicillin
me
that-
tell you about the work I did during that time. As you know, I was back into Paris, starting my neurosurgical work again in September 1944. And Vincent died in November 47. And for during these 3 years, I was practically the head of the neurosurgical service, except for the first 1 or 2 years where Vincent was still very much at work. And I told you, first work, brain abscesses. The second work I started in 1946 or 47, and I'll tell you a little more about it. It was my work on what I called selective psychosurgery. The beginning of it is my observation on tumors of the corpus callosum, and I found, which is not very difficult to find, that the behavior of the patients before, of course, the stage of high hypertension was quite different for the usual frontal tumor. There was not at the beginning this sort of what we call the hypomanic syndrome made of exaltation and so on, which we know, of course, quite well. So I thought there was something different between the mesial phase of the frontal lobe and the convexity phase. That was my first observation, which I did mostly to someone I must quote to you, a girl called José Wayman Jones. She was, because she died at 45, when she was 45 years old. She was a medical student at La Salpêtrière when I was intern there, meaning in 1937. She was a medical student there, And she was one of my students, and I was struck by her beauty. She was an Eurasian girl, half Burmese, half British, and her cleverness. And believe me or not, at that time, that girl was finishing her medical. She was at the same time a star of the Lido musical in Paris. But she thought there was something else to do in life, and she was a medical student finishing her school. Okay, so we became friends, and I suggested she did some brain surgery with me. And she started brain surgery with Vincent and myself in La Pitié in 39. And she made her thesis on the tumor of the anterior part of the corpus callosum. She was quite a girl, extraordinary girl. She went after that, being British, she had to go to England, and I saw her later on, but that's another story. Anyway, that's one of the beginning of my tendency to start psychosurgery.
You were not influenced by Dr. Watts's work in Washington, D.C. on psychosurgery?
You mean Freeman and Watts?
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you about them. So I knew, of course, the literature about psychosurgery, but I was not satisfied with the classical lobotomy, of course not. That was the main thing. The second thing, Larry Poole, as you know, had started in Columbia University what they call a topectomy. Limited operations on psychotic patients submitted to careful tests before and after.
Yes, Fred Mettler did.
And Mettler, I knew Mettler quite well. Yes. Quite a neurologist, this man.
Yes.
Oh yeah, first class. So I decided to start a sort of selective surgery, frontal surgery too, and I organized a sort of team. Thanks to the Maudsley Hospital in London, probably you know, the Maudsley, it's a part of Guy's Hospital. The pathologist in charge was a first-class man called Alfred Meyer. And the surgeon was Murray Falconer. And they had a first-class psychologist too, Eysenck, German-born.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay. I worked with all those people. I started in La Pitié, and later on in La Salpêtrière, a sort of specialized unit with psychological team, started thanks to a pupil of a Rylander called Mrs. Schalling. My psychologist was Madame Choppy, and I had a psychiatrist called Dr. Gash, and I had a pathologist called Dr. Foncin. So we started doing selective frontal surgery.
Who was the pathologist? I'm sorry.
Foncin. A very well-known man now because he did lots of interesting work on Alzheimer's disease.
Yes,
he had an American prize for that recently. Yeah. And I started doing selective frontal surgery, not on psychotic patients, but on neurotic people and pain people. It was, and we had psychological tests, which, in my opinion, was better than the test used by Poole and Mettler. And so we could compare what happened before and after the operation, and so on. You see a general idea. And I found really striking differences of behavior, of a testing behavior.
But where did you make your lesions, and how did you make your lesions? In what part of the brain?
Shall I speak in terms of Brodmann's areas?
No.
Well, anyway, I used what I call the convexity operation, which was either topectomy or cortical undercutting of the 9 and 10 areas.
All right.
Or l'operation was devised first, I think, in 1946, the mesial operation, which was on the perisingular area 24, area 24.
Yes.
And I found a quite striking difference of behavior after the operation. After the singular operation, we never have the hypomanic syndrome and so on, you know.
Did you find that you could free patients of pain?
Yes, that after the convexity operation.
Yes.
Oh yes, of course. Oh, yes, that's evident.
And for areas 9 and 10, what were your indications for removing areas 9 and 10?
I think the main indication for removing area 10 are intractable pain and neurologic introverted syndrome, because it gives to the patient a certain amount of extraversion without intellectual deficit, of course. In the limited operation, we never have any intellectual deficit by testing. Huh? I know what it means.
Did you operate also for depression, severe depression?
Yeah, depression set.
What areas?
The idea is that convexity and orbital operations were the best.
Did you find, as Kenneth Livingston later found in Boston, that there were autonomic changes that could be found by stimulating
Yeah. We found that several times. Yes, I'm aware of Livingston's work, but there is something, if we have time to say that in a few words. For instance, I remember that one day I operated on a man who had how do you call it, causalgia, you know?
Yes.
He had huge edema of the day following the operation, convexity operation, the whole thing subsided. But maybe it's just because he was free of pain and could move his hand, you know what I mean? So it's not necessarily an autonomic change.
No, I understand.
You know what I mean? Huh?
Yes.
No. Well, anyway, I don't want to dwell too long on psychosurgical operation, but this discovery, which I think I made on the special effect of the perisingular areas, anterior perisingular, may, I think, have some future. Anyway, as you probably know, psychosurgery now is gone mostly with stereotactic
yes,
approaches,
stereotactic,
and most of them are on these regions.
Yes.
I mean, mesial aspect of the frontal lobes.
And the mesiolimbic and
well,
yes.
future will tell.
Yes.
Anyway, quite apart from brain abscesses and psychosurgery, of course, I made all the classical work, brain injuries and so on, and brain tumors, meningioma. But that I don't want to tell you about that. That's perfectly
How large
normal.
was the neurosurgical service? How many active beds were there at La Pitié?
In La Pitié, we are about 150 beds. Oh, but it's not finished now. Well, as you know, Vincent started being very ill in 1946.
What did he suffer from?
Probably a cancer of the pancreas, but it's not sure. It's not sure. Anyway, he slowly deteriorated, and in November 37, he had a cholecystostomy, hemorrhage in the drain, so he was worse and worse, of course, and we stayed with him. I remember I was on ward the night he died. But he died very soon after. Quite a blow.
Is he buried in Paris?
Very?
Is he buried in Paris?
Very what?
Was he buried in Paris? After his death, was he buried in Paris? Claude
No,
Vincent.
he was buried not far from Paris, in the place where he was born, not far from Orléans, a little village called Ingres, where he used to go every week to hunt. Well, after Vincent's death, neurosurgery was not yet organized. Huh? There was just La Pitié, a few people starting in Bordeaux, Montpellier, Lyon mostly, but nothing official. And after Vincent's death, of course, there was a big fight in Paris, as you can imagine. And the man who really started neurosurgery is a neurologist, started official neurosurgery at that time, is a neurologist called Pierre Mollaret.
Mollaret,
Your name,
oui.
my name. Thanks to his activity, in 1948, were created the first neurochirurgiens des hôpitaux de Paris.
Was he?
You know what that means? Official neurosurgeons of Paris hospitals.
Was he at the Hôpital de la Pitié or Salpêtrière?
No, it was at La Salpêtrière.
Yes,
It was at La
that's what I
Salpêtrière, and even at that time, he was no more at La Salpêtrière. He was at l'Hôpital Claude Bernard, professor of infectious disorders. But never mind. Anyway, thanks to him, the 4 first neurochirurgians were created at that time, and they were David, Twesch, Guillaume, who was the Martel's pupil, and myself.
But Petit de Tailly also.
No, Petit Tailly
Not
was
yet.
Petit was a general surgeon.
Yes.
He was in the jury. I mean, he was member of the people who nominated us, but he was not a brain surgeon. He was not only a brain surgeon. He was only a general surgeon.
He was at La Salpêtrière, I believe, as well.
He was at
wasn't
Raspberry. He was assistant of Professor Gosser. But now we are nominated, the 4 of us. But someone had to take the place of Vincent. After Vincent's death, we had to have a new professor of neurosurgery in Paris. And Petit de Tailly was nominated by the University of Paris. Okay. And Petit de Tailly told me that I could stay with him, but after a few weeks, no, he didn't want to have me anymore, so I had to leave La Pitié. And that's another fight which started, I don't want to dwell too long about that, But in 1950, after a big fight with the general surgeons, Mollaret succeeded in having a large surgical service in Lariboisière, liberated for neurosurgery. And I had it. It was a huge place, 120 beds. But I started neurosurgery there. I had to organize it from zero, see, because it was but everything went well. And for about 10 years, I stayed in Lariboisière.
Was that the first, the second neurosurgical service in Paris, Lariboisière?
Yeah, it was the first with La Pitié.
Yes.
La Pitié. But Guillaume, we was in La Salpêtrière. A few years after that, had his place made an independent service as well.
Mm-hmm.
And David and Pêche had the same thing in l'Hôpital Sainte-Anne.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
But when did Professor Talairach start
Talairach
his work
worked with David.
with David? He trained under David?
Yeah, he worked with David at once.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the first assistants of David.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So that was the first organization of neurosurgery in France, the first neurochirurgien des hôpitaux de Paris, and a new professor of neurosurgery. But very quickly, there were other neurosurgical chairs in Lyon, in Marseille, in Lille, in Bordeaux, in Montpellier. I tell you the main ones, that's all. And now, of course, they're everywhere. Mm. Well, after that, after the 10 years in Lariboisière, which was very intensive work, I went to La Salpêtrière. Why? Because Guillaume died suddenly. He died very young, when he was 55 years old, something like that. And so La Salpêtrière was free, so I went to La Salpêtrière, which was, of course, a much better place. Enormous place, too, 120 beds again.
But before Guillaume's death, there was no neurosurgery being performed at La Salpêtrière, really, was there?
About Guillaume himself.
Guillaume, but
yes, he had a wing which became independent.
But he was not trained in neurosurgery. He was a general surgeon.
No. Guillaume was
probably
you didn't realize what I spoke too fast. He was trained by Martel for brain surgery.
By Martel.
By Martel. Yes.
I see.
Yes, and he was since the beginning. He was a real brain surgeon, a real neurosurgeon.
I didn't know he'd been trained by him.
Guillaume is really a neurosurgeon. Well, so that is the situation. That was the situation in 1960. So at that time, I was the chief at La Salpêtrière. David succeeded Petit Dutailly, he was the chief at La Pitié. Pêche died very soon too. And Oudard succeeded me in Lariboisière.
Well,
Guyot at the Hôpital Foch and so on.
Did Oudard train under you at Lariboisière?
Oh yes, he was my assistant there for 10 years.
What I
for 10 years.
Must have been.
Yeah.
And then did you eventually return to La Pitié before you retired, or did you retire from Lariboisière?
No, I retired from La Salpêtrière.
La Salpêtrière.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I stayed at La Salpêtrière from 1960 to 1978, you see? Yes, and I retired at that time.
Those were very big years for the growth and change at La Salpêtrière. The hospital grew tremendously.
Yeah.
The neurosurgical service became much larger, as I recall.
I don't think it's much larger. There is an say for the now to become smaller, on the contrary.
No, I mean the years when you were there.
Well, yes, I had 4 wards. I tell you, yes, it was a big place, but I had many assistants. Mm-hmm. It was quite a place. But speaking of my assistants, after I left, some of my assistants have important places now. One called Cressard is a chief in Rouen, for instance. A girl called Redondo is in the Hôpital Beaujon. Another one called Mademoiselle Stillart is a chief in Colmar. Another chap called Minuit is in Annecy, and so on. Well, of course, every neurosurgeon has his pupils going here and there.
Where did the late professor of neurosurgery at Lyon train? Did he train with you at...
Who?
I can't recall.
Vertheimer was the chief at Lyon, but he died, of course. He died a long time ago.
Had he trained with you, with Clovis Vincent?
Oh, no. He was older. He was a general surgeon, and he trained by himself, and he was a good surgeon, but he was not a neurosurgeon. He was a general surgeon doing some neurosurgery, but he did well.
Now, I became confused a year and a half ago regarding the agrégé. Was it necessary when you completed your training to achieve an academic position to pass the agrégé examination?
I don't see exactly what you mean.
Formerly, I thought it was necessary to become an agrégé, to pass the agrégé examination in order to become a professor in medicine or in surgery or any particular specialty in medicine, professeur agrégé. But then a year and a half ago, I was told that no, that's no longer true.
Well, now to become a professor, that's what you ask.
Or
No,
at the time
for
when
instance-
you completed your
For
training.
example, when I went to La Salpêtrière in 1960, I was not a professor yet. But 2 or 3 years later, I was made a professor of neurological surgery by the Paris University.
Did you have to
There was only one university at the time. Now there are several.
Yes.
It's different.
Did you have to take the written examination and the oral
No,
examination?
no. It's not necessary. There is a sort of examination which is called aggregation, but
That's
it was
what
not
I'm-
necessary. I never did it, as a matter of fact.
That's what I
No,
was
but
not clear
it's
about.
not necessary.
Now, today, the university,
Vincent was never agrégé, for instance. He was made professor of neurosurgery, just like that. Yeah.
by the University of Paris.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when did the Université René Descartes, when was it formed? The Université René Descartes, which is in the old Faculty of Medicine building on
And the-
Boulevard Saint-Germain.
I couldn't tell you exactly.
Was that recently, I mean, within the past 40 years, 30 years?
Probably, yes.
Uh,
But I'm not quite sure.
And is there a separate faculty of medicine at the University of Paris, distinct from the University René Descartes? Are there 2 faculties of medicine in Paris now, or more than 2?
Now in Paris? You mean how many schools of medicine, faculties of medicine in
Yes.
Paris? At least 7, I think.
7.
7, yeah.
Mhm.
Yes, because I was in the 7th myself. Yes, at least, 7.
I see.
7.
Independent entirely.
Independent entirely, yeah.
How many neurosurgeons approximately are there in France practicing at this time?
Oh, but now at least 200
200.
neurosurgeons, huh? Not all professors, but now the title of professor now doesn't mean much, you know.
Yes.
When you are chief somewhere, you are made nearly automatically a professor, which is
Are-
all to the best.
The major part of head-injured patients, are they treated by general surgeons and orthopedic surgeons in France, or are they treated primarily by neurosurgeons?
You mean now?
Now,
No, now the neurosurgical training is made by neurosurgeons. Yes.
but I mean treatment of head-injured patients. Are they treated primarily by, or at least initially by general surgeons or orthopedic
No,
surgeons?
that's of course a good question, but it really depends on where you are. Most of them now are treated by general surgeons because they are, now the things are well known. They know how to treat them now, you see?
Yes.
I mean, the neurosurgical education has made, as you can imagine, tremendous progresses since I started my medical career. And certainly, there are many general surgeons now who know very well how to treat a brain injury. No, a skull injury at least. No, now the thing is certainly much more of a routine than it was.
You had mentioned earlier about your research and clinical work utilizing penicillin and surgery for the treatment of brain abscess, and then your work on psychosurgical procedures and pain especially. What were some of the other major interests you had?
Well, I
and
didn't tell you
contributions?
much about it because after all, it's the sort of thing that every brain surgeon does. Lots of brain tumors, of course. Huh? That was my main occupation.
Did you
Lots
have
of brain
any
tumors.
particular
I was
interest?
much keener on brain surgery than on spinal surgery, for instance. You see? So I did, but there is nothing much original about that. I could tell you lots of things, but not especially on my own, not necessarily personal. You know, no, that's the normal trade of every brain surgeon. I did a lot of that. Huh?
Was there any particular area of brain tumor surgery that interested you?
No, not especially. Not especially.
There was a doctor or Professor Roussy.
Roussy.
Yes. Did you know him? He was in
Why do you ask
pathol-
about Russi? I'll tell you why. Why do you ask?
Well, for two reasons. One, he was a pathologist, and also he had written, co-authored a book on neuroendocrinology in 1946, a big book. I think the first book ever written on neuroendocrinology. And that has interested me for a long time, because at the time very little was
On
known.
peut interrompre un instant? Well, I'm glad you asked me about Russi. I know him quite well for very many different reasons. I'm sorry if I start in 1916. At that time, Russi, he was Swiss, he was a Swiss man, Swiss born. He was a member of the French Society of Neurology, very well known. At that time, Vincent was, of course, in the front of the army. And Vincent had started a method of treatment of what we call pitiatism, hysterical soldiers. You know what I mean? I don't give you any details. But anyway, apparently this worked very well. And one day, Russi, in the French Society of Neurology, presented a method of treatment of hysteria, which was exactly the same, or nearly the same. And he said probably Mr. Clovis Vincent was not very satisfied for what he do because he gave it up. Vincent told me after that. I was in the trenches. I read that. I didn't hesitate 1 second. I asked for a permission, and with my boots and helmet and so on, I rushed to Paris. I went to the neurology. There was another meeting at that time. And there he delivered a sort of terrible speech against Russi, telling that it was exactly the same method, and the reason why he, Vincent, had given it up is because he went back to the front, that's all.
Right.
Not as the people who stayed in Paris doing mundane neurology and so on.
But Georges Guillain and Russi also were friends at that time.
Oh yes, of
were
course,
they
but
not?
let me go on,
Oh, I'm
It's
sorry.
not finished.
I'm sorry.
It's not finished.
Okay.
Russi was so hurt by this that he couldn't walk. Babinski had to take him by arm to make him go out of him. Okay, that's the first episode. Second episode, quite different. Russi was a great man, you know, and he forgot all about that. And as you told, he was very instrumental in helping Vincent to become professor of neurosurgery.
Russi was.
Russi, oh yes, he was very helpful. Vincent was grateful to Russi. Russi forgot the offense, you know. After all, who was responsible? No, probably Russi himself, but it doesn't matter. He forgot that, and he was very helpful. Vincent liked that a lot. That's the second episode. Third episode. After the war, Russi, Swiss-born, was involved on a story of fraude fiscale, we say in French, difficulty with payment of income tax. And he had to resign of the function of rector de l'Université de Paris. He had to resign. Vincent was already very ill. But he asked me to go and see Russi to tell him that Vincent himself sympathized with him. So I went and saw Russi at that time. You see, that's why I knew him quite well. And I told him that the income tax business, we were not concerned with that, but at the time Vincent wanted me to tell him that he was very grateful for what he did and he would still a friend of his. And Russi was very much touched by that, you know what I mean? He was deeply moved by what I told him. But I believe he killed himself, Russi, several months later. I'm not quite sure. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, the three first episodes are that I'm sure of.
But had he not also worked with Desjardins?
Yes, of course.
Much earlier,
He was a
and
very good
Guillain.
pathologist.
And
And
Guillain
on
also.
the chronology of the medial brain and so on. Oh, yes.
Well, I have an old atlas of his of brain tumor pathology.
He was a very important man,
histopathology,
Russi.
yes.
But he so happened that I knew him for different reasons, as you see, personally.
But I think that I may be mistaken about the second author, but I think that Russi and Mulleray were the authors of this very large book on
Yeah, that's true.
neuroendocrinology
Yes.
about 1946 or 47, before the concept of the pituitary and the hypothalamus was
Yeah.
very far
Yeah.
developed at all.
Quite a good book.
It is. It's an encyclopedia of knowledge at that time.
Well, I'm thinking of other things in a few minutes which we are left. In 1936 and 37, I was an intern in Vincent's wars. I don't know if you remember, it was the time of the beginning of the war in Spain.
Yes.
Franco against
The Republic.
the Republicans.
Yes.
And many prominent Spanish scientists came to France, and especially Vincent received the very famous pathologist Del Rio Ortega. And I worked with Ortega many times. Ortega taught me brain pathology in a way.
That's why Ortega
spent
had
2 years
so
in
many of his specimens, not from Spain, but Del Rio Ortega obtained many of his specimens from France, from the French doctors, and also from Germany.
Yeah. He was a very first-class man, though, you know, Ortega. I
Yes.
liked him very much.
But
He
how
taught
about
me a lot.
where were the sentiments of Ramon y Cajal? Now, he appeared on a postage stamp published, printed by the Republic, Spanish Republic. He must have died just at the beginning of the Civil War in Spain.
Anyway, yes, I think so. I visited, later on, I visited the place where Ramon y Cajal and Ortega worked in Spain. You can imagine sort of a cubicle so small.
They used to have
Not
fights.
bigger than this table, maybe.
I've been told that they used to have fights, very serious fights, arguments about ideas, concepts, and all.
Microglia.
Well, yes, but physical fights that they fought one time in the streets. They got so impassioned. But how about the other doctors from Spain? Were there any other doctors performing neurosurgery in Spain during or before the Revolution and during, the Civil War and during the Civil War?
Well, I don't know, but I had some friends. Obrador was a friend of mine.
Obrador, but
Marquez, whom you know probably,
yes.
in Lisbon, very,
Yes.
very dear friend of mine.
But Moniz, did you meet Moniz?
Oh yes, I met Moniz. I met
Uh-huh.
Moniz at International Congress for Psychosurgery in 1944 or 46, I think, in Lisbon. Yeah, I met him. And we voted.
he
we
was-
asked the Nobel Prize for him, I remember.
Yes, he was in 48, I think he received the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
But he was already paralyzed. He had been shot by a patient.
He was not paralyzed.
I thought he was
he had a terrible rheumatism.
Well, I was told by several people he had been shot by a psychotic patient.
That's
That's
at
what I
that
was
time?
told. But I don't,
But he was already retired since a very, very long time.
But
You mean Egas Moniz?
Egas
No,
Moniz.
I doubt it very much. I never heard it anyway.
Well, I've heard that from several
But,
people.
I can't
but,
be an
you know,
authority on
I
that.
don't know if it's true. But also his successor, the neurosurgeon, who continued the neurosurgery that Egas Moniz had commenced. Oh, I remember meeting him 2 or 3 times in the 1960s.
Why?
Almeida Lima. You knew him.
Lima, of course, I knew him quite well too. He worked very much with the British brain surgeons.
Yes. After the war ended in Paris or in France, in the area of occupation, the French area of occupation in Germany, was there any effort made by the French medical services of the French government to help to restore the medical facilities and the hospitals in Baden and other areas of the French zone of occupation? Do you know offhand?
No.
Did they help to rebuild hospitals and to?
I can't give you a very precise or personal answer on that. I don't remember quite well.
Did Professor Tönnis retire from practice in Germany?
Who?
Professor Tönnis.
No, I don't know what happened to him after that. I don't know.
He had stayed very busy during the war in Germany.
He was a rather nice man,
Yes.
I think. No.
Professor David had very strong feelings about him.
Well, by the way, thinking of David, you know that all the people who founded the French Société de Neurochirurgie de Langue Française, I'm the only surviving member.
The
Founding member. Yeah.
You are.
Not after all, it's because I was the youngest at the time. So
Well,
it's normal that I've survived more.
Until last November, Paul Busey was our last surviving member of our Harvey Cushing Society.
Who?
Paul
Busey?
Busey.
Paul Busey?
You knew him
I
well.
knew him well.
And did you know Percival Bailey?
I met him. So even he came several times to France, and I saw him every time. Oh yes, I was very fond of him.
He was also
very sound man.
He was also very in love with France and French culture and French medicine. In fact, Wilder Penfield and several others whose orientation was more towards the United Kingdom and doctors in the United Kingdom couldn't understand his love for French medicine and medical history and culture. And I think it's probably best that we end the interview very soon now. I want to thank you, Professor Lebow, for this opportunity. We didn't even touch upon your post-retirement interests.
Well, I want to thank you first, Roy. And you realize how brain surgery allowed me to meet so many interesting people?
Yes.
Thanks to brain surgery, I must say, a very interesting life.